Hey guys, Level Cap here. Today we're going to be doing a complete review of Star Wars Battlefront 2. We'll be talking about all the major issues with the game and really talking a lot more about the gameplay rather than just the progression system, which I feel like has overshadowed a lot of maybe the more important aspects of this game, like whether or not it's fun or how much depth is there to the multiplayer. We'll also be going over the single player towards the end of this video, and I'll let you know when that's coming up because I will be talking about some of the potential plot holes in the storyline. Now, let's just start off and get the whole loot crate system out of the way. It's been ridiculous online right now. Everybody's talking about it. One of the developers responded to the loot crate system on Reddit, and it became the most downvoted Reddit post of all time, which is totally nuts. The post itself was for the most part fine. They were just trying to say, hey, we're working on it and we're going to readjust some of the unlock values for like heroes in the game, which have basically come down to the point where it looks like it's going to take about 40 hours to unlock a hero. In a $60 game, you know, you want to play as Darth Vader, and then it's like, hey, you got to spend 40 hours just working on Vader. You can't spend any of that money on loot crates. You have to save it all up and spend it all on Vader. And as you can imagine, players are not happy about that. Nor are they happy about the loot crate system in general, which gives you straight upgrades over other players. Now, I spent $100 or the $90 sale price on crystals in game so that I could buy a whole bunch of loot crates to upgrade my character and try out new stuff. Now, there is a level lock requirement to upgrading your skills to the highest level. I hit that level lock requirement in under 20 hours. You have to hit rank 20 and then you can upgrade your star cards to level 4. And in this video with this A-Wing here, I have it completely maxed out with full level 4 star cards. It gives me the ability to turn 20% faster than other ships, or other interceptors rather. So I'm pretty much the fastest thing on the field. And then I've also increased my rate of fire substantially and the damage per shot substantially. So I'm doing about 30 to 40% more damage than an equivalent interceptor, and I can turn faster than them. This does give me a direct upgrade over other players. Yes, I had to put in about 20 hours to get to a high enough rank to upgrade my star cards, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not too much. I would not have been able to upgrade these star cards to rank 4 without spending considerable money on loot crates in the meantime. Once you hit rank 20, unless you've been focusing on one specific tree like starfighter interceptors or maybe the heavy assault or the heavy class for infantry, maybe you could get one level 4 card by that period of time, but the rate at which you gain crafting points and in-game currency is incredibly slow. DICE has not done the math right. The amount of time it would take to start maxing out a bunch of different classes in this game would probably be hundreds and hundreds of hours if you weren't going to spend any in-game currency, and that of course is why so many players are upset. I was able to bypass a huge chunk of time by spending money upgrading my cards and getting an advantage over players, and I'll probably have this advantage over most players in the game for a substantial amount of time unless they're willing to spend that money. So right off the bat, I have an initial advantage, and I imagine over a long period of time, several months down the road, I'll probably still have a substantial advantage. This was a big mistake by DICE to create a loot crate system which was not based around side grades. It would have been substantially more fair if they made the upgrades side grades. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, if I were to get the ability to fire faster with my interceptor, rather than that being the only ability, it should also come attached with a longer cooldown when my weapons overheat, so that I can shoot faster, but now I have to wait longer in between firing. Or if I can turn faster, say the additional maneuverability, which I upgraded my interceptor with, it should then reduce my overall health by a certain amount. Some of the cards in the game give you just more health in general. For example, the bombers can be upgraded to have 20% additional health. Certainly DICE nerfed this a bit from beta, which was 40% health, but it's still a substantial upgrade. To balance that out, they should have said you get 20% more health, but now you turn slower, or you move slower overall. These kind of things would have turned them into side grades, and although you can then spend money to sort of better specialize your fighter or bomber or your heavy class or whatever it is, you're not going to get a direct upgrade, but rather a side grade. And this would have calmed a lot of the problems with the community, and I think made the system much more fair overall. Sadly, DICE did not do this, and they just gave you direct upgrades for paying money. Now, to be fair to DICE, the upgrades for the infantry classes are nowhere near substantial as they are with the starfighter classes. So you get a huge upgrade with starfighter classes, like my interceptor getting like 30 to 40% more damage and 20% more maneuverability. That's a huge upgrade that wins me firefights, that allows me to outclass better players than me. When it comes to infantry, you do get decent upgrades, but it's not quite as substantial as it was before. You can gain upgrades that'll allow you to absorb 28% more explosive damage. You can get better shields for your heavy class. You can get faster ability recharges, things that will give you a little bit more durability on the battlefield, but they're not necessarily always going to win you firefights. I found it far less effective when playing infantry, even if I had some maxed out classes. Like my heavy class is maxed out right now, and he can kind of be a tank and take a real beating, but I'm still losing firefights to really good players or people who get the jump on me. It's not like I'm just invincible now. Overall though, when it comes to the loot crate system, I think it was just poorly implemented, could have been designed much better as a side grade system, and also been easier to get some of the max rank star cards by just playing in game. DICE again needs to revisit a lot of things, and they did say they were doing so in, well, the most downvoted Reddit post of all time. Okay, so loot crate system addressed. Let's actually talk about the gameplay itself, the game modes, multiplayer. How is it? Well, there's a lot more depth to it than Star Wars Battlefront 1. It's still reliant on third-person peeking mechanics, which I guess I've just sort of grown to accept. It was one of my big negatives about Star Wars Battlefront 1 is that they didn't offer a first-person only mode. Now I'm just kind of accepting that's the way the game's designed. People are going to be third-person peeking corners, and that's just how you play the game. Beyond that, the new class system with the 4 different classes on the battlefield really add a lot to variety, and it lets you customize each class to your specific playstyle. Sadly, there doesn't seem to be different loadouts for each class, which I think is kind of needed, as classes like the Heavy can transform themselves into more anti-vehicle classes, but in order to do so, you have to really swap out like all 3 star cards that you're using and switch them over to something else. This doesn't take forever, but it's still a bit of unnecessary work, and a loadout system allowing you to switch between different loadouts for the same class would certainly simplify this process. Unfortunately, DICE has made one of the same oversights though that they made with Star Wars Battlefront 1, which is a lot of the anti-air weaponry is locked behind star cards. So starfighters are going to dominate like crazy in Galactic Assault. I've been taking advantage of it. It's how I got to rank 20 so quickly. If you're decent at flying, you can dominate troops on the ground, you can dominate AI, you can just have a fun time in the air, relatively unchallenged by ground forces. Now again, the Heavy class can get weapons that are good at shooting down starfighters, and upgraded guns can start using ion shots, but in order to get that, I think you need something like 200 or 250 kills with a weapon to unlock that ability, and frankly a lot of players aren't going to get that for quite some time, so the start of the game is going to play very differently because anti-air weaponry just isn't prevalent throughout the game. It should change maybe in a month's time or so once people start to unlock the AA weapons, but again, just kind of a weird oversight. Why would you want your game to play differently and balance differently at the start as opposed to when people start unlocking the high-level counters to some of the exploits in the game, like killing everybody with a starfighter easily. So unfortunately, I can't really comment on overall balance of game modes like Galactic Assault, which lets you mix infantry and starfighters and AT-AT and ATST all together in one game mode, because most of the best anti-vehicle weaponry just isn't in the game. Maybe that anti-vehicle weaponry is going to suck and won't really counter well. I can't comment on that yet because it's just not in the game. So as it stands, starfighters have a huge advantage in the balance system right now. It's a lot of fun to play infantry, and unless there are really good starfighters up in the air focusing on infantry, you might not get killed by them too much, but there's some modes where I just feel really bad for the enemy infantry because I'll go on like a 40 or 50 kill spree completely unchallenged in the air, and there's times at which I can do a single pass and get 4 kills, maybe even 5 kills, depending on how many guys spawn at a time. So there's definitely some problems with it in its current state. That being said, the Galactic Assault game mode is still really impressive from both a visual standpoint and from a gameplay standpoint. It's actually quite fun, mixing heroes, vehicles, and troops together in one massive game mode that transitions between different types of objective gameplay throughout the course. It's a great game mode. I gotta give DICE credit. It doesn't always play out incredibly well depending on the map you pick. For example, Theed is a beautiful looking map, but once the gameplay transitions to the interior close quarter fighting, there's only 3 choke points to enter a palace, and there's enough players out there that it becomes a grenade spam fest. So you might really be enjoying the gameplay at the start of the round, and then when it comes to the end of the round, just thinking like, oh god, this is just intolerable. It's not fun at all. So there's definitely some map design choices that I feel don't balance well with the way the game is designed. And big surprise here, grenade spam is a big part of this game. Grenades do a huge amount of damage. Weapons generally have a much slower time to kill compared to the way that grenades operate in this game. And rather than using grenades as a method to get people to move out from behind cover, I feel like they're mostly designed as just ways to get cheeky kills. And so interior combat really suffers from the amount of grenade spam, and I think DICE could really do themselves a favor by lowering the overall blast radius of grenades and the overall damage, making it more of a way to either soften targets up or get people to move. And that would be much more enjoyable for me from a shooter standpoint. I'd rather shoot my enemies rather than get lucky grenade kills. Now, if there's one thing that I've seen the community agree upon pretty unanimously, it's that this game is gorgeous. The visuals are top notch. The authenticity, the sound effects, everything about this game makes you feel like you're in the Star Wars universe. The old maps from episodes 1, 2, and 3, whether or not you like the films, still look incredible and are a lot of fun to play on. Playing on Kashyyyk is probably my favorite map. It's sort of the D-Day of Star Wars, if you will. The Wookiee homeworld. It looks incredible. It's stunning. Giant trees, droid tanks moving up the beach, trying to defend them with massive clone turbo tanks and a giant cruiser in the background. It's just a beautiful looking map, incredibly realized, and the art team at DICE, again, is putting out some of the best work I've seen in gaming, period. If you're a Star Wars fan, this alone is reason to play the game. There's details in here that might fascinate you if you really like to know about like the structural design of things, or how DICE has realized some of the bases or the progression of the Theed area or the progression of the Kashyyyk area. They've done their research. They've gone to the Lucas vaults and scanned many of the original models to put them in game with 100% authenticity. I imagine a lot of the ships that come from the digital era of the films are probably some of the original digital models put into the game with a 100% accuracy level. Everything is unparalleled, and playing the game on PC at 1440p resolution with a stable over 100 frame per second frame rate is just beautiful. It's a really fun and engaging experience. Stability wise, I haven't had any major problems with the game. It's running on the Frostbite engine now, which is fairly well tested, but of course, as we've seen in the past, as long as the game is optimized at launch, then it'll run well. If it's not well optimized, then you're in for some crashes. But personally, I haven't had any stability issues, so it's been running really well in early access. Now, although Galactic Assault really is sort of the premier game mode for Star Wars Battlefront, the thing that mixes everything together unless you fight in a giant all-out battle, Starfighter Assault is still a great game mode, the one that is only focused on starfighters. The controls for starfighters has improved significantly. It's not like realistic space combat or anything like that, but as far as Star Wars goes, I think it's certainly good enough to give you decent control. And there's definitely some skill level to it. It's fun. It's a hell of a lot more fun than the original game. It's something that I actually really enjoy transitioning to between playing infantry-based game modes and then starfighter-only game modes. I have fun in both of them, and that's really a testament. Usually games are built around one type of game mode, and all the other ones are just sort of added on there as fluff. You know, like here's something to do if you get really bored with this type of game mode. But Starfighter Assault, I think, is good enough to stand on its own. Now, there are some fluff game modes. Blast and a few of the other ones out there are just kind of simplistic, not quite as impressive, but again, they're there if you get bored of the standard game modes, and there's plenty of assignments and progression built around all the different game modes that encourage you to try everything out. Heroes vs. Villains, although maybe not the most fun game mode out there, certainly gives you a good opportunity to practice with heroes before you unlock them with battle points in a Galactic Assault game mode. So it definitely serves that purpose in terms of just getting familiar and practicing and trying out different star cards for them. Overall, I'm actually really impressed with the multiplayer experience. The Loot Crate thing unfortunately overshadows a lot of it and has stolen a lot of the media and the attention about this game. But if you look past the Loot Crate system and some of the potential advantages you can get there, it is a really fun multiplayer experience. And even though I did spend money on Loot Crates, I still think it would be fun without spending money. I think also if DICE adjusts the Loot Crate system and allows you to gain crafting points and in-game currency at a slightly faster rate, it won't be that big of a discrepancy between players who just play the game a lot or players who don't play a lot but have spent a lot of money. You should be hopefully on equal footing. In addition, it shouldn't be overlooked that the fact that this Loot Crate system is in the game in the first place is because DICE needed a way to try and monetize the game, because they're creating all the DLC for the rest of the game for free, which includes new single player content, new multiplayer maps, new multiplayer content, heroes, and other stuff like that down the road. That's really exciting. They're not going to divide the player base from here on out. So if you invest in Star Wars Battlefront 2, yeah, you're investing in a game that has a bit of a Loot Crate system problem, but you're also investing in a game that's going to give you a ton of free content without asking for any money for it. So that's exciting. That's a huge plus to the game. There's way more content in this game than the original, and I honestly think it's a solid buy even before I get to the single player aspects of the game. Now that being said, let's talk about single player. I'll warn you if I get to any of the spoiler parts of it. First of all, there is the single player. Big upgrade from Star Wars Battlefront 1. It covers a really interesting aspect between episodes 6 and 7. After the Death Star explodes, what happens? How do we evolve to the Battle of Jakku? Now, it might not get into as many details as you were hoping for, but that's also because it's covering the story from an Imperial perspective. You play Iden Versio, who is someone who commands Inferno Squadron for the Empire. She's deeply involved in the Empire, grew up on an Imperial loyal homeworld, and basically sees the rebels as terrorists, people filled with hatred who want nothing more than to create terror and destroy the Empire. Again, the graphics here are incredible. Iden Versio is rendered really well, and her character seems believable when she's talking or reacting or making facial expressions. That's an important part of any single-player game these days. The characters have to look real. When it comes to the writing and developing their characters in-game, I feel like 5 hours probably wasn't enough to tell the story that they wanted to. There is a book about her character which gets into much more depth and detail, and speaking to some people at a capture event, I got a much better idea of some of the build-up to the decisions made in the game, which otherwise might have seemed a little bit rash or done a little bit hastily. There's some very big decisions made throughout single player that might not be as believable without the backstory behind them. And I think it does suffer a little bit from just time constraints. When it comes to the gameplay and the fun aspect of single player, there were a few moments that I was like, oh wow, this is really cool, or this sequence here in which I'm fighting against these certain guys or whatever is actually really fun and engaging. But there was only a few of those. The rest of the single player is fairly standard. You're fighting rebels that, well, behave like stormtroopers do in the movies. They don't have great accuracy, they're not particularly challenging opponents, and in general, it's just kind of a linear campaign. Honestly, not unexpected, and if you're expecting something much more involved, like an open world exploratory type single player, forget it. It's not happening in this game. This is what you should be expecting from a DICE Star Wars single-player add-on to Star Wars Battlefront. And it does deliver, and it does meet expectations in that regard. And I think if you're just looking for something that's a little bit of fun and fills in some areas in between episodes 6 and 7, then this will do that for you. Now, I'm going to get into a few of the plot holes, so if you don't want the single-player campaign ruined, you can stop watching the video now. Okay, so I already mentioned that the single player suffers a bit from time constraints in terms of building up the characters. Well, Aiden Versio's character, as much as I like it, doesn't make a huge amount of sense given her role. She seems far too empathetic, and she has a big character change during out the single player that just seems to occur at a moment that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And frankly, trying to write a character that can exist within the Empire but also still be relatable is difficult. We have to remember the Empire destroyed Alderaan. They just straight blew up a whole planet with like millions and millions of people on it because what? There was loyalists there to the rebellion? I mean, like, the Empire is ruthless and willing to commit mass acts of genocide. The people that support it have to basically be zealots or just filled with hatred. And Aiden Versio really doesn't strike me as that kind of character. In fact, she seems relatively easily swayed over one specific act that the Empire conducts that really makes her change her mind about her loyalties. And this occurs when the Empire enacts Operation Cinder, which is a mission to activate these weather-type satellites that create inhabitable conditions on her home planet, a planet that is loyal to the Empire. Why would the Empire attack and destroy cities on its own homeworld or a planet that's loyal to the Empire? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It's explained that it's done as a demonstration to show others that the Empire has all-powerful control over the galaxy, and that to waver even in the slightest means that you will be killed or put on like a prison planet or something. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me that they would do this. It's sort of like the US nuking Texas to like show North Korea that we mean business and we're willing to do whatever the heck we need to do in order to maintain control. Like, it's the tactic itself makes absolutely no sense to me. And then when Aiden sees her homeworld being attacked that was loyal in the first place, that's when she has her change of character, when these innocent people are being killed, and she like goes through this thing where she's rescuing people from this planet. Again, doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me as someone who's been loyal to the Empire this whole time, supported the Empire while they blew up an entire planet of people, but then gets all wishy-washy when some innocent civilians on another planet that's loyal to the Empire are being killed. Again, it doesn't add up, and it's really hard to write a character that is both high-ranking within the Empire and also empathetic at the same time. The two things just can't really go hand in hand without a bit of lunacy behind it. Anyway, that to me is sort of the major plot hole in the campaign. It just didn't feel believable to me. Perhaps it is more believable if you read the Inferno Squad book that has much more backstory on Aiden Versio and her upbringing and maybe her thoughts on the Empire. I believe it does go over a lot more stuff, but within the game environment itself, it just wasn't as believable. There's plenty of other small plot holes here and there, not quite as big of issues, but in general, the single player itself was still kind of a fun time. I just don't know how much of it I want to incorporate into my own personal canon of Star Wars. Like, I know this is supposed to be official canon, but in terms of believability and tactical decisions made by the Empire, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I might just shuffle this whole storyline away and keep it somewhere that doesn't really affect my overall understanding or like desire to keep the plotline of Star Wars in a somewhat believable state. Despite the fact that there's plenty of plot holes and whatnot in the films itself, it just seems to be one of the underlying things with the overall Star Wars universe is there's a lot of plot holes everywhere, and maybe we just have to accept that whether it's a game or a movie. Anyway, that pretty much wraps it up for my Star Wars Battlefront 2 review. The message that I would like to go out with today is that Star Wars Battlefront 2 is a huge improvement over Battlefront 1. If you even remotely enjoyed Battlefront 1, you'll certainly like Battlefront 2. There's way more depth to the infantry combat. Starfighter combat is much more enjoyable. There's a big progression system in the game despite its flaws. And there's a single player campaign there. Regardless of some of the plot holes or that it's not the best single player ever made, there's still a single player there, and it's going to have additional content. In fact, there's going to be plenty of free content coming for this game. This is a massive upgrade over the first Battlefront, and unfortunately it's being overshadowed by the loot crate system, which has really taken precedence in all the coverage of this game. Is just how Star Wars Battlefront 2 is being treated as a pay-to-win. I think it's slightly a pay-to-win right now. With a little bit of work, it can be turned into a pay-to-have a slight advantage for a little while type game. But this was a big mistake on EA to implement the progression system the way it is now, as it has clearly stolen the thunder of what I think is a really good game overall. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.